Candidly, the book's for myself. As crazy as that sounds, it's when I first thought out to write it, I really wanted to write it under the lessons I believe in that compass when it comes to entrepreneurship, as almost like a daily reminder, right? Like your North Star. But coincidental, there is thousands of entrepreneurs that I knew would appreciate something like this. In fact, it's what I do for a living, right? And I teach these principles. So although somewhat egotistically and somewhat selfishly, I wrote it for myself, I coincidentally and purposely wrote it to help as many people as possible too. But I don't want to mislead. It really is something where I needed something to remind myself why I love what I do, what I've learned over 10 years of what I do. And sometimes a reminder when things are stressful, things are tough, when you hit the bumps in the road, but it's for any entrepreneur in their entrepreneurial journey. Long story short, in 2013, I nearly killed my company and bankrupted myself. And it was because I was an entrepreneur and not an entrepreneur. This book was wrote under the understanding of what's the difference between an entrepreneur and a entrepreneur at its surface. But it was also meant to be a practical guide on what makes a great entrepreneur great. And basically I defined 8 key fundamentals of a framework in the book that when you gauge yourself off of it and you look at yourself upon each of those pieces in the framework, that's how you'll become a successful entrepreneur and how you'll stick to the game long term. And one thing I'll add is this isn't like a book I wrote on how to properly file your tax returns or make money or die or any of the normal business cliche and things you read in business books. Even though it's a business book, it's wrote more from a philosophical layer, from a very stoic layer, because that's the piece that I feel is it's not talked about enough in entrepreneurship, and the difference between a great entrepreneur and a wantrepreneur, hands down. I break down the framework into 8 pieces. So 1 is empathy, 2 is leadership, 3 is short-term thinking, 4 is long-term thinking, 5 is economics, 6 is operations, 7 is purpose. And I feel like I missed, 8, is self-awareness. Even when you write your own book, sometimes things jump in, right? So it breaks down each of those 8. And basically the idea is like, how can you rate yourself between a 0 to 100 on how you're doing each of those individual skill sets? So like, how are you doing from an empathy perspective when running your business? How's your leadership style when it comes to running your business? Are you thinking too much about the short term or not enough? Too much about the long term, not enough? How are you gauging your business in economics, understanding economic cycles, right? How are you dealing with operations? How are you monitoring the health vitals of your company? What's your purpose, right? Like not your passion, what's your purpose? What literally will make you keep working, even if you feel burned out and frustrated and upset and angry and stressed out and everything in between, right? And then self-awareness, probably the most key aspect of it. You can't do any of this without being self-aware. You can't actually gauge yourself without being truthful to yourself, right? So throughout the book, I break down each of those key fundamentals, each part of that framework. The book's actually broken into 2 parts. The first part is basically explaining why you need a framework. It uses my story. It uses examples of what happens when you kind of don't have a North Star. And then it introduces what the framework is, how it works, what you're supposed to do. The second half of the book goes into each fundamental of the framework, giving real lessons, real stories, and then actual practical guides on what to do to better gauge yourself. And then at the very end of the book, we actually include the diagram of the framework and how you can actually rate yourself and consistently do that. So it's actually both. In many ways, it's almost like 2 books in one, the how and the why. And that's kind of how the book was broken down into. The cool thing about the book that I've been very fortunate to hear from feedback is like, it gets better when you reread it. And it gets better where once you read it, it starts feeling like more like common sense and you can just apply it. And you can start almost, I hate to use the word subconscious, like this book's some higher meaning. It's not that. But a lot of the lessons you learn really are common sense, but we don't think about it because we feel like in entrepreneurship, things need to be more complex than they need to be successful, which it isn't. A lot of times it's just the fundamentals that's needed. So a lot of times it beats down the fundamentals so that you just stick to it and it acts as second nature for you.